I am talking to Sean Horgan of the Gloucester Daily Times. Sean has written a fantastic series on the 1918 pandemic. Hi, Sean. How are you?
Good, Heather. How are you?
I'm good. What did you learn in your research?
Well, I guess I was thinking about this morning. The thing that I really came to the conclusion on was that the more things change, the more they remain the same. You know, they faced so many of the same issues in 1918 with the Spanish flu pandemic that we're right in the midst of right now. And, you know, even though healthcare has exploded and improved, exponentially since 1918, we're still at the mercy of these tiny little things. And so much of what is used to treat it is non-pharmaceutical. And it's really what we're doing now: quarantining, isolation, personal hygiene, disinfectant, all the stuff that we're being told now was exactly how they treated this back in the day.
That's amazing. And as I understand from your research, it moved very quickly from Boston to Gloucester, right?
Well, it's hard to tell where it moved to and from because it seemed to be showing up at the same time in a lot of different places. The research that I did showed that the first U.S. cases were reported out of Kansas and at an Army installation in Kansas. But at the same time, it was starting to show up in Boston, it was starting to show up in Europe, and it was starting to show up in Asia. So to this day, I don't think they've ever, accurately tracked where this thing started and how it spread.
So it was not necessarily the war efforts?
No, I think that's the common perception, is that it came back with the doughboys. But in reality, it started here before the Americans started coming back in large amounts of numbers. So once you get to the spring of 1918, and as you move into the fall toward the armistice, there are millions of soldiers around the world in transit. And so it just went with them.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. So what other sort of details were you able to talk about what happens here on Cape Ann?
Well, I thought it was very interesting that the primary treatment center was an outdoor facility. It was a tent hospital that they set up at Addison Gilbert that was run by the State Guard and the U.S. Army, with some help from the doctors and nurses at AGH. But they were under the gun too, and there was such a critical shortage of nurses and emergency physicians that the tent hospital was basically left to the Army and to the State Guard. It was 100 tents, and it was up for, not much more than 3 weeks. But in the interim, this thing spread quickly, and it spread in a very deadly fashion.
And who in Gloucester was hit first?
Well, East Gloucester seemed to get it the worst in the initial stages. The post office and postal carriers, it's funny, since the first 2 parts of the story ran and the third part ran today, but yesterday I got at least 2 texts and emails from people I know who had relatives who either died in it or were impacted by it. And one of them was Mary Ann Shatford, who she and her husband own the Crow's Nest. Right. And she's in the midst of tracking her family, doing the family search. And her father, or either her grandfather or her great-grandfather, was actually a postal worker. And he wasn't hurt by it, but his wife was. She contracted it. So, in those days, postal workers, mail carriers, it was a very different thing. It was a much more social thing. They went in for coffee every place they stopped. They were invited in for a piece of pie or just to chat. So these guys were in and out of probably every residence in Gloucester at some point. And it's just, you look at it and it's a highway to infection when that goes on. So the post office and the annex both had to be fumigated, and there were a number of postal workers that contracted it and died from it.
That's amazing. And any rhyme or reason as to who was infected and who got sick from this?
Not really. It really killed without prejudice, without any sort of acknowledgement of geographical or generational boundaries. There were 3 primary groups that were hit the hardest. And I forget the specific numbers, but it was infants, and then people, young 20 to 40, which was really hit hard, and then people over 65.
Interesting. So between 50 and 65, they were spared. For
Yeah, to a degree, yes. I mean, they still had it, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the other three age groups.
Yeah, that is just amazing. And how about the other towns on Cape Ann? Were you able to understand what was
I
going
just cursorily looked at those because I really knew I wasn't going to have room to do the whole Cape, and I really wasn't going to have time to do the whole Cape. But Rockport was probably second in terms of the number of cases, and then Essex, and then Manchester.
on? And what other connections are we able to make between 2020 and 1918? Anything else that you can see as
Well, no, really. It's we're going through the same thing now. It's clearly this is much longer. I mean, that thing came here in September and was gone before October was out. And obviously, we're still in the midst of what's been going on since at least early March, maybe even sooner than that. So, in that regard, it's different. But I think it's also there's been much more proactive um, planning and much more proactive sort of restrictions that have been imposed. Those restrictions, they tried to do social distancing in their own way back then, and even the reports that we had said it was applied unevenly at best. So now I think people have a much greater understanding of what's going on. We live in a much more rapid information age, and people have come to understand what affects people in China, what affects people in Japan, what affects people in Italy and Europe really now affects us because of global travel and everything else in the way our lives are led.
well, I have two things to say to that. I mean, the pandemic in 1918 spread as quickly as this one has, really
Right.
quickly, right?
But it disappeared even more quickly. I mean, we haven't had ours disappear yet. In Cape Ann, it was roughly a month and a half before it was completely gone. But a month and a half ago, we were still in the middle of it. So,
But what I'm trying to say is that things were not. We perceived 1918 as being not such a global economy, and yet that virus was able to spread like wildfire.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we've always known it was the little things that are going to come get us. The things we worry about huge wars and nuclear attacks and terrorism. But in the end, it's the little guys that are going to come get us. I mean, because we just don't have a handle on how to treat these things, on how to develop that. We don't develop vaccinations as quickly as people would like them to be developed. We can deal with terrorism. This stuff it's really a mystery to us in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it is really. I mean, we've all become sort of little experts in tracking
Yeah,
things, right?
I've become more confused than anything.
Yeah,
I don't know who to listen to. I don't know what's right. You use your common sense here and listen to people and think, okay, well, that makes sense to me. And I think that's what we should be doing. And then you talk to other people who you might have some intellectual regard for their opinion, and they will say, no, that's not right. So I am more confused now than I was before. So I'm just sitting here, and the whole world can keep going on out there. And when they tell me it's safe to go out there, I'm going out there.
well,
That's how I'm rolling.
that's great. Do you have a mask?
I do. I have two masks, as a matter of fact. I have a mask and a backup mask. So I'm covered on masks. I'm good on masks.
Well, anything else you want the world to know about your story?
No, I was really happy with the reaction and the readership. A lot of people read these stories, and that was really rewarding. And I was really glad that for the length of time that it took, and the difficulties that we encountered in reporting the story, I was really happy with the way they came out, especially the first two installments. The third I thought was a little thin, but I was really limited in the type of reporting I could do because of where we are today. And so as I look back on it, I'm happy with the work, and I think people have maybe not enjoyed it, but I think they found it interesting.
Well, I found it interesting. I keep trying to let you go, but then I have another question for you. So just comment a little bit on how difficult it was to do that research.
Yeah, I really wanted to put like an editor's note with the series because of the to sort of explain how this series came together, because journalistically it came together much differently than most do. Usually when you embark on something like this, I've written Enterprise at a lot of places, the Dallas Morning News, the Indianapolis Star, the Hartford Courant, and Enterprise reporting is really about maintaining momentum, sustaining and maintaining momentum in your reporting. Once you drop that string, it's very, very difficult to pick it up. But you have access to so many different avenues of research and so many different avenues of information, starting, as I always do, with the public library. And we're very fortunate here in Gloucester to have a terrific library system, I think, and some really quality people who work there. And so I couldn't go to the library. I couldn't request anything. I couldn't look at microfilm. We don't have our microfilm anymore. We haven't had a machine for a long time. We donated our microfilm to the KPM Museum. So I was at a loss, and a woman by the name of Jacqueline Linsky, who is a research person at the library, came to the rescue, and she went through all of the Gloucester Daily Times from the beginning of September to the end of when the pandemic was here. So she put in a lot of work on this, and she got every single story and then scanned them in and then emailed them to me so that I could print them out. And without her, there's no way this series gets done. So she was like the Red Cross in this thing. She was one of those nurses with the cool hats. And she did a terrific job. She really did a terrific job. And you get a little nervous when you're trying to write stories based on other people's research, because you don't necessarily know what you're missing. And in the end, I came to really trust her, and I'm very, very, very thankful for her efforts. So that was a good thing. And what ends up happening with these stories too is once they start running, then the people you wish you could have talked to at the beginning of it while you were doing the reporting, people who had either some familial connection to it or lost relatives, well, they start coming out. Unfortunately, there's no fourth part, so I can't really use it. But I got a voicemail today from a gentleman whose father died at the hospital. And I got another email yesterday from a gentleman whose grandfather was a Portuguese fisherman, and he died in the Tent Hospital as well. So those would have been great things to have been able to sort of flesh out. But our hands were tied. We just had to do the best job we could do, and then you let it go.
Right. And did you ever find out where the people from the 1918 pandemic are buried?
No, I did not. In fact, there was no way for me to even trace that because I had so few names. I would needed records that I couldn't get to. The Board of Health has really good records stretching back to 1918 here in the city, but those were all in the city annex, which I had no access to. So it was a difficult story to report. And I think we did as well with it as we could. There were things I obviously would like to have done to get more names, voices in there from the period. But, 6 to 5 and pick 'em. You take what you get.
It's a wonderful series. It really
No,
is.
thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I hope everyone can go to that Gloucester Times right now. And it's not hard to read straight through.
It's, I think it reads pretty well. I'm always happy when I can get the Red Sox in there. So we got the Red Sox in there from the 1918 World Series. So that was good. And, some of the things that we unearthed I think were really interesting, especially about like the postal workers in East Gloucester and the women. I think we have to point that out. The women throughout this were the bedrock. Not only the Red Cross people, but the notices that were in the paper every day asking for women, not just asking people to volunteer, asking specifically women to volunteer, because I guess it was considered their lot. The men were out work doing, making a living, and so you're the ones with time. But between the nurses and the volunteers, the women saved it. They really did.
Well, let's end on that high note.
All right. Suffragette all the way.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Sean. And
okay, Heather. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye.
All right.